Good morning, everyone. We have now formed a quorum and it's the appointed time. Let's get started with the Subcommittee on Pesticides Ordinance Amendment of Schedule 1 Notice 2014. So we are here to elect the chairman, and the details are set out in Schedule 4 of the Rules of Procedure or the House Rules. So we will have to have a nomination and then to be seconded, and it has to be seconded at least by one member. So any nomination, Mr. Tommy Cheung, Emily Lau. All right, there is no seconder. I don't accept the nomination. How about you yourself? I'll nominate Mr. Tommy Cheung. I don't accept the nomination. So you can nominate the one seated behind you, Ms. Sito. Okay, I'll accept the nomination then. Who seconds? All right, Mr. Albert Chan. So Ms. Sito has accepted the nomination. Any other nominations? If not, then I declare that Ms. Sito has been elected. Please come forward, Ms. Ho. Thank you very much. Let's invite the administration team to join us.
In
fact, this piece of subsidiary legislation should be very brief and simple, but then still we would like to set up this subcommittee to look at how we make changes to the schedule on the pesticides ordinance and how we align ourselves with world standards and also the mainland standards. So I think the officials are coming in, right? We have 4 officials with us today, and let's introduce them. We have Ms. Henny Lam, Principal Assistant Secretary for Food and Health, Mr. Ms. Jeannie Chang, Assistant Secretary for Food and Health, Mr. Clive Lau, Assistant Director from the AFCD, and Ms. Carmen Chu, Senior Government Counsel from the DFJ. Over to you, Ms. Lam. Please walk us through the subsidiary legislation. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, allow me to briefly go through this Pesticides Ordinance Amendment of Schedule 1 Notice 2014. Before I move on to the notice proper, with your permission, I'd like to briefly go over this CAP 133, the Pesticides Ordinance, and also in 2013, what we have done with regard to the Pesticides Amendment Bill and the substance of that amendment bill. In fact, under the Pesticides Ordinance, we are responsible for regulating the use of all pesticides in Hong Kong. In other words, if you want to use any pesticides in Hong Kong, you're subject to this ordinance, and it's the AFCD which is responsible for regulating that. And therefore, for all pesticides that are on sale in Hong Kong, they will have to be registered with the Director of AFC. And under CAP 133, Section 4, the Director of AFC will have to keep this register on pesticides, and Part 1 would deal with pesticides that can be put to immediate use without any need for further procedure. And then Schedule 2 is the other pesticides, and basically for the domestic use pesticides, they are used by households, and then for the rest, they will have to be used by professionals. And the Director also can use this licensing and permit system to implement a very stringent regulatory regime on the use of pesticides. For the pesticides that are just referred to according to Section 7 of the ordinance, unless anybody is in possession of a valid license, he is not allowed to supply or sell any pesticides that have not been registered. As regards the register that I just referred to, that is all the other pesticides. In the law, we call that unregistered pesticides. And according to this ordinance, anyone, unless he's in possession of a valid license, he is not allowed to import, sell, in possession, or use any pesticides that have not been registered. And last year, in 2013, through the Pesticides Amendment Ordinance, the purpose of that ordinance is to amend the Stockholm Convention and also the Rotterdam Convention in order to enable us to fully comply with the two conventions. And through the amendment bill, we introduced the schedule so that for all the pesticides listed under the two conventions, they've been listed under Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 of the ordinance. And with regard to the pesticides that have been listed in the schedules, anyone who would like to import, manufacture, or sell or supply the pesticides, he will have to get a license. So the purpose of this notice is to amend Schedule 1, and Schedule 1 lists out all the pesticides that have been listed under the Stockholm Convention. And the two conventions are here to protect human health and also environmental, and to protect the environment. And the Central People's Government in 2004 and 2008 have applied the two conventions to Hong Kong respectively. And last year, after the amendment to the Pesticides Ordinance with regard to the regulation of pesticides, we are now fully able to comply with the two conventions, and the amended ordinance has also come into effect on the 27th of January this year. With regard to the two conventions, other than regulating pesticides or chemicals that come under the term pesticides, we also have regulatory provisions on the use of non-pesticides, but they are also chemicals, but then those will be regulated under the Toxic Chemicals Ordinance. With regard to the amendment exercise on this occasion, the Stockholm Convention, with regard to the 6 pesticides that have only been added more recently, they are now added to Schedule 1. The reason why we are only able to do that now, that's because last year, when we came up with the amendment bill, as China is one of the contracting parties to the convention, China has yet to complete the procedures of adding the 6 pesticides in its schedule. That's why we have to wait until the Central People's Government has completed its legal procedures of adding those 6 pesticides, and then after they've noticed the SAR government, before we can add that to our own schedule. So this is a relatively direct amendment, i.e. for the 6 pesticides that have been included in the Stockholm Convention, they are now added to our Schedule 1. Thank you. All right, the floor is now open. Because we don't have many members here, that's why I'm not going to impose a time limit, but then please do not speak for too long, or else I'll have to stop you. Ms. Emily Lau and then Albert Chan. Madam Chair, well, for the 6 pesticides here, they are not very controversial, but then I'm sure there has been some controversy in relation to some pesticides, and I understand that there has been a public outcry on this. I therefore suggest that the administration should explain that now. Yes, the public would expect that the pesticides that have been listed in the schedule would be there to protect public health and the environment. But how come we can have something that has been exempted, and you also say that you will have to accommodate the mainland's regulations? So we are not clear about that. So can you explain to us the procedures? Is it that the procedures would allow for such exemptions and accommodation or whatever? Or should you have been very fair to determine which is allowed and which is not, in order to ensure that public health will be properly protected? All right, Ms. Lam, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Lau, for your question. I suspect that what you were asking were about the residual pesticide in foods. I think earlier on, about 2 weeks ago, the Secretary for Food and Health has already explained that at the FEH panel, and he already consulted members on your views on that. In fact, the two pieces of legislation are regulating two different things. Well, we are talking about CAP 133 here is the Pesticides Ordinance, and it's mainly regulating the use of pesticides that are being used in Hong Kong, and that might be used in farm products and also in horticulture, gardens, and also schools, and even domestic use for pesticides that can be used in households to kill cockroaches and so on. So the Pesticides Ordinance is there to regulate the use of pesticides, but then a fortnight ago, when you talk about residual pesticides in foods, I think that is mainly targeting on residual pesticides in foods, for example, pesticide residues in foods. So these are two pieces of legislation, and the coverage and the scope and the purpose would be very different. That's why in this piece of legislation, we are mainly regulating the use of pesticides, and therefore we are talking about two very different stories. Yes, that might be two different stories, but then can you also tell us whether there will be a similar notice that will be presented or tabled before this council, or is it that once they have been exempted, it's exempted? Well, for that piece of legislation, I understand that in the light of the discussion 2 weeks ago, the administration already promised that in the light of members' comments, they would be reviewing that again. As I'm not responsible for that regulation, I'm not sure what the legal procedures are. I suspect that you're referring to a regulation, and that's why it's also a piece of subsidiary legislation, and therefore they might also come back to seek your approval. Secretary, you'd like to say something? I think the Secretary is also referring to another piece of legislation. So please go back and take a look, because many members of the public, they have no idea as to which ordinance and is which ordinance. So there is a public outcry, and they're taking it very seriously, and they hope that we can grasp the opportunity in the first instance to stop you from doing what they think to be inappropriate. So if that's not your purview, then please go back and alert your colleagues. You say that 6 pesticides will be added to Schedule 1. But then when you refer to the Stockholm Convention, actually there are 22 pesticides that are covered, including 15 pesticides, and you have now dealt with that, and 7 non-pesticide chemicals will also be covered, but then you have not mentioned that. So what are those? So will they also be hazardous to health? Ms. Lam? Well, the Stockholm Convention would be targeting certain chemicals. Some chemicals are used as pesticides, but then mainly is looking at pesticides or chemicals which are persistent organic pollutants which might be hazardous to health and the environment. That's why the purpose of the Stockholm Convention is to gradually phase out the manufacturing of such chemicals and pesticides. And looking at pesticides, as members have just referred to, the Stockholm Convention has got 22 chemicals and 15 are pesticides, and of course that's now covered under the Pesticides Ordinance. And 9, actually, when we enacted the ordinance last year, we have already included those in Schedule 1, and 6 are missing, and we are taking this opportunity under the Pesticides Ordinance Amendment of Schedule 1 Notice 2014 to add those 6 in. With regard to the remaining 7 chemicals, as I said in my introduction, well, those will be covered by another piece of legislation that's under the purview of the Environment Bureau, and that's the the Hazardous Chemicals Control Ordinance, CAP 595. So those will be covered by the Hazardous Chemicals Control Ordinance. Those are mainly used for industrial purposes and so on. So you have not done it yet. Well, That ordinance already came into effect in 2008, and according to my understanding, a couple of weeks ago, the Environment Bureau also briefed the Environment Bureau, suggesting that the 6 would also be included. So they've already raised that, but then they have not dealt with that yet. So for the 6 newly added chemicals, there is going to be another amendment. All right.
Madam Chair, I think it is because at first the PRC hasn't ratified the 6, and so we have to do it in accordance after they've ratified the 6 chemicals. I don't know why it has taken that long for them to finish the procedures. It's better for us to finish it early. Now, in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to attend a UN hearing concerning the Convention on Economic Rights. Usually they drag their feet, so it seems that we are forced to slow down accordingly. So it appears to me that under this mechanism, we can't help it. We have to wait for them to finish first, and then we have to follow suit. So I really want to find out how it works. I want to know whether it is possible for us to take the initiative and do it on our own first. Ms. Lam. Well, application of international conventions to Hong Kong. Well, we have to follow the procedures in accordance with the articles in the Basic Law. Well, according to Article 153 of the Basic Law, the Central People's Government, in the light of the needs and actual circumstances of Hong Kong and after consulting the SARG, applied the international conventions to Hong Kong in relation to those that China has acceded to. Now, for the Stockholm Convention and Rotterdam Convention, the signatories have to be sovereign nations. So procedure-wise, we have to wait for the national government to ratify the conventions first before applying them to Hong Kong. In relation to the application, or really in relation to the discussion and inclusion of new chemicals or new pesticides to our laws, well, in fact, the FCD does attend annual meetings. In fact, Mr. Lau joins the Chinese delegation to attend international meetings. For pesticides, which should be sort of included or regulated under our law, Mr. Lau can certainly exchange his views with the other members of the Chinese delegation, but I'm sure we have to follow the legal procedures before we can add any pesticides to our ordinance. Therefore, in future, I'm afraid we also have to await the completion of the procedures on their part first, and then we have to wait for their formal notice, and then we can amend our own legislation. Albert Chan, Madam Chair, I want to know whether we're going to invite views from the public so that we can find out if anybody is interested in forwarding their views to us. And then last year, we scrutinized the bill. What about the scenario in which a government officer breaches the law? What was the final position? I think Mr. Cheung can recall exactly what happened at the end of the day, and after proposing CSAs, we dealt with the concerns of the then Bills Committee. In other words, the ordinance would bind the government as well. And then for the criminal liabilities, there will be an exemption. But then for public officers, should there be a breach of the legal requirements, such public officers will still be subject to prosecution as well. In terms of civil liabilities, if someone has been doing something in goodwill, despite his status as a public officer, does not have to bear any personal responsibility. For this one, I want to know whether it comes into amendments together with the previous bill. Well, in fact, on 24th of January this year, it came into effect. I'm referring to the amendment ordinance. Now, we would like to include 6 more pesticides as part of this notice and subject to the agreement of the LegCo. Then we would like to bring it into effect on this 1st of June this year. What you mean is that the regulation passed last year would also come into effect. It has already. Those endorsed last year have already come into effect on the 27th of January. And for the 6 additional ones, they will be taken up together with the amendment ordinance. Madam Chair, I think last year we were very interested in the use by the government of such pesticides, and would like to know whether the information would be passed to the public via the website. I think last year some people told us that certain people might be allergic to certain chemicals, or they found that certain pesticides would pose a hazard to young children or elderly people who suffered from respiratory problems. So they were worried that the use of such chemicals would have an impact on the respiratory system of such vulnerable people. So if it is available on the website, that will be easier for people to find out about it and can avoid contact with such pesticides. But the government said no to the proposal. I wondered if the administration would reconsider the case. You talked about the mechanism, you talked about the procedures. I think you certainly know what's being used. Either the government applies the pesticides itself or through a contractor. What is being used and when the pesticides are applied, I'm sure everything is known to you. So if we require publication of such data within a certain period of time via the website, I think it is feasible. In the past, parents were not aware that pesticides were sprayed at the kindergarten, and then children subsequently suffered from the impact. Now, technology is very much advanced nowadays, and I cannot agree that this cannot be done. Ms. Lam, last year a Bills Committee was set up to scrutinize the amendment bill. As the member has pointed out, there was an in-depth discussion. Other than the bill itself, I think members were very concerned about the safe and proper use of pesticides. Lots of views were forwarded to us. If members recall, well, in fact, upon completion of the scrutiny, the Bills Committee recommended a lot of follow-up action. The administration undertook to follow up on your recommendations, and the Secretary for Food and Health, during the speech to resume the second reading debate, made it a point to pledge his undertaking. In July last year, the bill was passed, and for the past few months, the FCD has been very active in following up on your recommendations. We do have a list of follow-up action. The member referred to the use of pesticides in public places and in schools. Upon completion of the scrutiny, FCD colleagues made it a point to come into contact with the stakeholders who attended your hearings, in particular Mr. Malcolm. So we approached them and we tried to find out what their concerns were. So that has been dealt with by the FCD. For the use of pesticides on school campuses, I'm sure in a moment Mr. Lau can supplement. The AFCD has prepared certain leaflets concerning the safe use of pesticides on school campus, and has been distributed to schools in Hong Kong. And together with the Education Bureau, we organized a number of workshops inviting school authorities to take part. So special schools, kindergartens, primary schools, secondary schools were invited to attend our workshops so that they can either do it on their own or they can invite contractors to carry out the pest control work. And we have reminded them of the precautionary measures. Say, for example, spray the pesticides or apply the pesticides only when the school children are not on the campus. In a moment, Mr. Lau can supplement. And then the member referred to the publication of information on the website. Well, last year, during your deliberation, the point was made known to us, and we did try to find out whether it would be feasible. As stated in our explanation last year, we're talking about the application of pesticides all over Hong Kong. Other than government departments, of course, in the private sector, a lot of pesticides would be applied. And even within the government, we've got different departments. And then the area covered will be huge. Say, for example, the country parks. If you require the details of the application to be published on the website, I'm afraid it will involve a lot of clerical work. And then the outcome may not be that proportional. However, last year we did say that we will promise to do the following. For LCSD and FEHD venues, we will step up the publicity and educational work together with them. In fact, the two departments have set up a working group to look into the application of pesticides so that we can have more discussion and we can remind them of the precautionary measures required. In a moment, Mr. Lau will elaborate on their work. We've also agreed to study the following matter. That is, after they have applied pesticides, they should put up a sign to indicate the use of pesticides. I think last time members said that the information should be as detailed as possible, and then a telephone number should also be provided. In our list of follow-up action, we have included this point, and we are trying to meet the requirements one by one. Maybe Mr. Lau can actually tell you what has been done over the past few months. Mr. Lau. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members. Good morning. Mr. Chen did put forward a lot of suggestions during the scrutiny of the bill. There was a paper running to 8 to 10 pages, and we're actively following up on the recommendations. Say, for example, whether all information should be uploaded onto the website. We refused to do so. However, we did come together to have a discussion afterwards. We maintained our conclusion that it would not be feasible to upload the information. For example, we have got the drain covers or manhole. We have the drain covers on the road, and then we do apply anti-mosquito oil. So if you want information to be uploaded, it means that all the drain covers have to be identified and uploaded onto the website. And then in this way, citizens can't tell what is hazardous and what is not. According to our analysis, is that people won't be sort of coming into contact with the drain covers.
But then in gardens or parks, or for back lanes where rodent pesticides are used, of course, members of the public will have to be more careful. And in terms of the toxicity of certain pesticides, in terms of its toxicity, is even lower than that for table salt. So we don't think that's really very practicable to have to put up a notice. But then for rodent pesticides, then we agree that that's dangerous. That's why we have to distinguish between those that are not hazardous and those that are hazardous, and where people might have contact with certain pesticides. And we agree to put up notice in areas where toxic pesticides are used. And in the past, we would not inform the public as to which department is doing that. So we will make improvements. In other words, we will put up the name of the pesticides and the registration number and which department is responsible and the contact number and so on. So we'll gradually be doing this with different departments. So for major departments like the LCSD and FEHD, which will be taking the lead in doing that, but then for raw departments that are using pesticides, they will be asked to do that gradually. And then we will then be extending that to their contractors and even pesticide companies and so on. So there will be very clear standards. As for schools, I understand that there have been concerns amongst members, and that's why Mr. Malcolm and another expert lady, we have met with them to listen to their requests and aspirations. We will have to do that step by step. For example, the font size is not large enough and that parents have not been informed and so on. So we have jotted down their comments, and then in our work procedures we'll try to incorporate what they asked for. For example, labels and communication with the stakeholders and so on. We have organized seminars and workshops for schools, and 4 forums have been held, and some 96 schools have participated, and later on we'll be uploading the information onto our website. So we have prepared some booklets, and we have also come up with a dedicated website on that, and the Education Bureau has also included this hyperlink in their website, and therefore whenever they arrange for any activities, our booklets would also be distributed. So we try to do that step by step. And then for the booklets and also the information on the booklets, we have now included some barcodes, so that as soon as you use your smartphone and scan the barcode, the information on the website will then be downloaded. So can you also give us the barcode, so that members can also take a look? Yes, we'll be doing that stage by stage. So can you pass it on to members? Well, some have been distributed to schools, because last time members also expressed some concerns other than that being used by the government. How about farmers? So we have also prepared some booklets for the farmers, so that when they use pesticides, they have been alerted to this, and also for household use. So these are very relatively simple booklets or leaflets, so that when members of the public look at that, we have used some images and animation to help. And then for the more commonly used pesticides that the public might come into contact with, well, that is the LCSD and the FEHD, which would be using pesticides more frequently. We have actually approached all the departments under the administration. We have issued notices or circulars to remind them of the statutory requirements, in particular for departments that might be using pesticides. Our AFCD colleagues have also prepared 2 seminars and briefing sessions to brief them on the requirements under the ordinance, and when necessary they will also have to apply for the license or permits. And if they have any queries, if they need to engage contractors, and if they have any queries, they can always approach the AFCD for technical support. So we try to adopt a multi-pronged approach to ensure the safe and proper use of pesticides. Yes, I'll line up again on this. But then just now I was asking about the use of pesticides and also the records. Well, I understand that, if you have to include the information on your website with regard to the use of pesticides throughout the territory, the manpower requirement would be very intensive. But then if you just focus on schools, I don't know if it's okay to extend it to elderly homes as well. But then according to my understanding, the the FH Bureau and the AFCD have done a lot of work, including organizing education sessions, seminars, and so on. But then with regard to the requirements, if you ask the departments concerned to come up with established guidelines for schools and aged homes and so on, if you require these institutions or if you require the licensing authority to be particularly careful with these institutions like CNA homes, kindergartens, primary schools and secondary schools, and also elderly homes and so on. So when they use pesticides under the control of the Pesticides Ordinance, then they will have to go through an established procedure internally. Would that be more effective? Because what I'm most concerned about is with the enactment of the ordinance, all right, you've done your publicity and education work, but then for individual schools, if they fail to comply because there are no guidelines whatsoever, if you have established guidelines for the school sponsors and they will have to fully comply with these procedures, then they cannot shirk their responsibility. So my understanding is that if you want to do it in one go, that might be difficult, but then the FH Bureau can promise that within a year or two, if you can do that step by step, then I think that would also go a long way in allaying the concerns in the community. Yes, Ms. Lam? Thank you. Well, when we organize the talks and so on, the Education Bureau has been very cooperative. They have been helping us with the organization of such talks. And therefore, as Mr. Lau just said, other than the forums, close to 100 schools, including school headmasters, teachers, they have all joined the talk to gain a better understanding. And then in terms of the dissemination of information, we have already done some work. As far as schools are concerned, well, there are different schools and the Education Bureau. Well, in this regard, we may have to contact the Education Bureau again after the meeting. But then there are many schools which are independent entities, and legally speaking, we do not have the power or requirement for them to do this. Well, how about the education bylaws? Because all schools have to be licensed, and it's the Education Bureau, which is the licensing authority. It's like the elderly homes. They all have to be registered. So at the time of issuing a license, you can require them to comply with a code of practice. And when they use pesticides, so you can decide on this code of practice that they will have to follow. All right, point taken. Well, I understand your suggestion, but then what I was trying to say was, in fact, there are many schools which might engage some professional pesticide companies, and the AFCD has issued some code of practice to these pesticide or pest control companies. But then how difficult is it for the Education Bureau to put up the information on the website and then for schools and the contractors to follow? So what I'm concerned about is that they might not follow the guidelines. So the AFCD's guidelines, yes, I think you can take it up with the Education Bureau, and what we are talking about is the same set of guidelines, right? Mr. Lau? Well, yes, we can come up with different code of practice, but then so are you suggesting that they can also become the licensing conditions for elderly homes and also education institutions? Would that go beyond the jurisdiction of our department? What I'm trying to say is, well, many people might think that, all right, for pesticides and so on, they are hazardous substances. But then I'd like to take the opportunity to correct that concept. In Hong Kong, for pesticides that are allowed to be used, well, the AFCD has been working very hard to exclude all those that are hazardous to health. That's why after this, well, the pesticides that are allowed to be used would only be slightly or moderately hazardous. The only exception is rodent control pesticides. Well, they might be rather toxic, but then they have been required to be diluted before they can be used, because for the concentration and formula, well, we have required them to lower the toxicity. But then we believe that for rodent control pesticides, they are relatively more dangerous. But then for a commoner, that might not have any effect at all. But then we are concerned that because of the respiratory system, they might be more allergic, and we don't want them to have an onset of asthma. Well, for the pesticides and the drugs that you refer to, I remember you also referred to DDT and Paracol. Well, in fact, for these substances, we have already come up with a very detailed guideline, and by the end of this year, on the 31st of December this year, they will no longer be registered. In other words, they will be banned from being used. And for substances that we are aware of that are being used in Hong Kong, they are not very hazardous. But then, in fact, for the substances that you just referred to, they would not be used in schools. But then, if you're referring to the volatile ones, or the ways they are used in Hong Kong, well, the droplet size would not allow them to be spread or become suspended and flow to other areas. But then, sometimes even for mothballs, they can also become pesticides. They are also organic pesticides, and therefore, at schools, for pesticides that you might come into contact with, well, if you're referring to statutory pesticides, in fact, they are not really very hazardous. I'm not requiring you to publish the information about pesticides, but then with regard to the code that has been issued to the licensed pesticides users or companies and so on. So for the code of control or code of practice, can you be distributing that to schools? Yes, I understand that you do not have the power to require them to comply with that, but then through the Education Bureau or the Labor and Welfare Bureau, well, you can call upon the two bureaus to comply with them. Whether or not they accept it is, of course, another matter. But then for the elders and also for the young children, if they can be properly informed, that would also be good. So why can't you just pass this on to the relevant licensees so that they can be asked to comply with them? I've already taken 2 steps back. So if the contractors have already been given a set of guidelines, why can't you also pass this on to these institutions? So will the FH Bureau consider passing this on to the other 2 bureaus so that they can also consider complying with them? I think this is the minimum that you can do. That is, you can also send this to the 2 bureaus so that they can send it to the schools and also the CNA homes and so on. But then if that has to be linked with the licensing regime, that might be difficult. So I can convey this to the bureaus for them to consider. But then I do have the duty to explain this, as Mr. Lau just said, for the use of pesticides. Well, as a gatekeeper, we have already tried our best to ensure that in terms of the concentration, the dosage, and also the use, they are safe to use. But then if you're referring to the more toxic substances, but then can you do one step further? That is, for these institutions, when they use pesticides, they will have to engage a licensed contractor. So if they can only hire a licensee to do it, and if the licensee is required to comply with the code of practice issued by the AFCD, then obviously they will comply with the code in using pesticides. Well, as we just explained, if you see a cockroach, you use some pesticides, so that's very common in a household setting. And then for CNA homes and schools, there are also chances that they might use such pesticides, and if we extend the control to such an extent, that might cause a lot of nuisance to the public. Ms. Lam, I think Mr. Chen was referring to the fact that when you hire certain service contractors, if you have to do a major or massive exercise of pest control and so on, you will have to apply the pesticide for a while before you reopen it. So I'm not referring to the use of pesticides in a household setting. But then anybody can use those pesticides, and even a school janitor can use it in schools. But then you've already issued the code of practice to the contractors, so it's not about the use of commonly used pesticides in a household setting. But then I'm referring to those used by the contractors. Why can't you just ask the two bureaus to pass it on to the institutions concerned? So can you show us the code of practice? No. What Mr. Chen was suggesting was that for schools, and if they use pesticides in the future, then they might have to follow the code of practice, or they might be required to hire or engage contractors to do the job. And of course, if we are talking about large-scale operations like Ms. Ho, you refer to the entire room that has to be fully closed in order to use pesticides for ants and so on. But then for normal and daily use, at schools, for individual janitors, they might be using that on ants and so on. So if they are just buying this speed tox from a supermarket to spray it on cockroaches and so on, well, they are already using pesticides, strictly speaking. And if you extend the scope too wide, then that might be problematic.
Do you regulate that in your code? No, you were saying that whenever that's being used. I think Mr. Albert Chen said that he had already made some concessions. Well, for the information, maybe through the Education Bureau and the SWD, we can pass the information to them. It's fine with us. Mr. Tommy Zheng. Well, I seldom oppose Mr. Chen in relation to this ordinance. I think I have to beg to differ from him. It will be horrendous if we say that you need to include the code of practice as part of the licensing conditions. With the educational sector and elderly homes, so I really want to comment on it. If you start to make it part of the licensing conditions, then it's worrying, because a school sponsoring body or an elderly home operator will easily breach the law without knowing it. I think as of now, I'm sure the FCD would be aware of the situation in schools and elderly homes. I think the exception would be schools like the one that I am associated with, where we've got hundreds of trees and we can't deal with it on our own. We must engage a contractor. Now, if someone gets a can of pesticide in a supermarket, I don't think you need to worry, because unless it is safe, it cannot be put on the shelf of a supermarket. What about pesticides bought a long time ago? And then for elderly homes, I think you might have already come across certain cases in which people have been made uncomfortable having come into contact with the pesticide. So would you try to persuade them not to use a particular kind of pesticide? I think for the school janitors, If you present a lot of chemical names to them, it would be meaningless. Do you expect them to cross-check the label on the can with your list? I think it is embarrassing for you to name certain brand names. So would it be possible to be more specific and try to deal with it instantly? Because to the elderly, to the young children, we really have to safeguard their health and safety. So I think you need to do it quickly and tell them quickly. I think when compared with Albert Chan, I'm making less concessions, though it will still be effective. So please issue some guidelines to them. But if you issue guidelines to them, when the information reaches the person in charge of a school or an elderly home, he or she may just pass it to a janitor. You may think that you have peace of mind, but will it really work? What does it mean to them? So you have to adopt a layman approach. You just come up with all the scientific names, and if you ask me, I won't want to match and find out about the information because I don't have good eyesight. I would just grab a can of pesticide and try to kill a cockroach. For the poison to kill the rodents, I think schools and elderly homes do have to kill the rodents. And you say that that would be the most potent one. So probably you need to explain the procedures to them. Tell them that they have to be careful, otherwise they may not be killing rodents, they will be killing people instead. So please try to explain to them clearly what may be used and what should not be used. Mr. Lau. The Labor Department has got officials in the Occupational Safety Division. They've written up some information uploaded onto the website of the FHD. It will be suitable for your use. Taking the views of the two members together, I think the information can be forwarded to the relevant operators in elderly homes and schools. For the point that you made just a moment ago, that's exactly what we're trying to do. In Hong Kong, we have got a center to deal with acute poisoning. So we try to find out whether somebody has been poisoned acutely, and we want to find out about the details. So we do ask them to forward information to us. For registered pesticides, we'll try to check whether it is safe to use them. So far, we haven't received any detailed information, but I can assure you that we will work harder in this regard. I take your point. That is for those that would be an allergen, and for those that have caused a medical incident causing the victim to be hospitalized, we'll try to put together the information and reduce it into writing that is comprehensible to laymen. We promise to follow this up. Madam Chair, if I may follow up one other point. There's convention. Now, it's the national government that is a signatory to the convention. I always thought that under one country, two systems. In the past, we did take part in many conventions and charters, like the Olympic Charter. I thought we could take part in our own capacity. But then in this case, I think it is different. For the Rotterdam Convention, signatories have to be sovereign nations. And it was only applied to us after 1997, right? Yes. Now, the national government is the signatory, but before they have introduced it, can we do the same? They haven't ratified. Well, before they have joined the convention, can we do so? Well, that's exactly what I want to ask. Now, you introduced the mechanism before the ratification. Well, it's a legal procedure. The mainland government signed the convention, but they haven't ratified the convention. They have to go through that procedure before applying it to the mainland. So the DFJ has given us this piece of legal advice from the International Law Division. That is, before completion of the ratification procedures on the mainland, it would not be applied to Hong Kong. Otherwise, there would be a uncertainty. So we will try to wait for the completion of the ratification of any convention before we would do anything about the pesticides. And of course, we have to wait for the formal notification from the CPG. And then we will formally amend our law. As to the point made by Mr. Lau, or the point Mr. Lau was trying to make, in terms of regulatory work, we have already done our job. We do regulate all pesticides in Hong Kong. For less toxic ones, we include them in a register, and the information has been uploaded onto the website. So relatively speaking, they are safer. For anything falling outside the register, that is the unregistered pesticides, they may be used, but you need to take out a permit. Generally speaking, they are more hazardous, and it would only be professionals that will be using them, and it won't be easily available in the market, in the retail market. And then a permit must be taken out to make sure that the operators will follow certain procedures. Now, once the FCD is aware that a pesticide will be discussed at the international arena because of the huge toxicity, and it is anticipated that a pesticide will become a regulated one. And Mr. Lau did attend conferences, and he's fully aware of the progress. So when it is anticipated that a pesticide would soon be covered by the convention, the FCD will also carry out a review. If it is found that it is very toxic, then it will be deleted from the register of pesticides. So that's our experience. But legally speaking, if we want to make it clear in relation to the schedule, to the ordinance, to mirror the convention, then we have to wait for the formal legal procedures. Madam Chair, I try to ask a number of questions here. I want to know whether we can effectively make use of the time of the government and the time of the LegCo. Don't try to break it up into a number of chunks. Now, they have already signed the convention, but then you said that you have to wait for their ratification. I agree that you shouldn't wait. Now, the CPG would do it, but then they have to take longer time to finish the procedures. For us, in order to safeguard public health, I think we should do it sooner. I'm afraid that we will become a dumping ground for pesticides outlawed in other places. So we have to be quick. I have no intention to criticize the pace of legislative procedures, including that in our own motherland. I think it's a matter, the sooner the better. Of course, you might be able to act as a gatekeeper by imposing a registration system. Now, you have a registration system, but I don't think you just want to bypass us. I think we need to strike a balance. If you do it too quickly, but then the importers have already bought the pesticides, and then they may suffer from a loss because at the time of importation they got the permit, they got the approval, and now all out of sudden if you impose a ban on it, then they will be at a loss as to what to do.
So the administration might need to buy back all the stock that they've imported. So I think it's a balancing exercise. All right, you have to strike the balance between protecting public health and also the loss that might be incurred by the businessmen, and you might. So I'd rather you be quick rather than acting too slow instead of waiting for the CPG statutory procedures, because they've already agreed in principle to become a signatory to the convention, and if we have to wait till after they've completed the legal procedures before we can do ours, I think we should do this in parallel, and I think that's better, because if you could have, if you had been able to discuss it with us last time, then we don't have to wait till June before these will come into effect. All right, this is the statutory procedure. That is, you will have to get the instruction from the CPG before you can do it. But then it's a policy issue. So whatever the channel is, or whether or not you might be a member of the delegate, or whether or not you are aware of what's being discussed in the international community through whatever channel. If you know that these pesticides will be spent sometime later, then you don't have to wait till after the CPG has completed its legislative procedure. Once you are aware of the latest information, then you could have done it. I'm sure the CPG would not be standing in the way of our legislation. And if the CPG has acceded or become a signatory to the convention, and if they have to ban it, then of course we will have to ban it too. But then even if they do not ban it, if we are adopting or going by our own policy, that is, we will have to protect our public's health, then what's wrong with legislating on these first? I think it all goes back to the legal basis. But then in terms of the actual operation, once we are aware of certain pesticides used, for example, if we know they are toxic, and if we know that they'll be banned sometime later, then our administrative work will immediately start. That is, we will then remove them from the list, and in the future, if similar occurrences occur, then we can seek the advice from the DFJ to see if we don't have to wait till after the CPG has completed its legislative procedure before we can do ours. So I'll seek the advice from the DFJ first. But then by way of a supplement, or the CPG in January this year inform us of its decision, and also the document has also been submitted to the UN Secretariat, and on the 26th of March this year, the relevant legislation on the mainland already came into effect. That's why we kick-started our procedure. So we are late by about 2 months, so we'll be implementing that in around May. Well, that's of course necessary, because you will have to wait till after they've done theirs before we can start ours. That's why I think it's not a problem for us to start in tandem, because if the purpose is to protect public health, then we should start fast. And then Mr. Albert Chen also suggested that we should meet with deputations. I'm not sure. If we do not have to meet with the deputations, then honestly, well, even today, we can just complete everything, because it's very simple. We should be able to finish our discussion. I don't think that's feasible in terms of our time management. You mean meeting with the deputations? Yes, for the entire subsidiary legislation, if you look at the enactment timetable. Secretary? Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. As members might have noted, well, the notice scrutiny period, if there is no extension, then the deadline is the 7th of May. With regard to the notice period, that will be 28th of April 2014, and according to our standard practice, with regard to the scrutiny of subsidiary legislation, well, we will have to make a report to the House Committee before the deadline. But then, as the House does not have a meeting this Friday, that is on the 25th of April, and therefore if members do not think that there is a need for us to extend the scrutiny period, then on the 28th of April, that is next Monday, you will have to submit a written report to the House. So time-wise, if we were to go for public consultation, we may not have time to do it. And even if you think we need to extend the scrutiny period, then that will be until the 28th of May. But then, as we have to pass a resolution on the 7th of May for the extension, that will have to wait till after the completion of the appropriation bill's third reading. There are more than 1,000 amendments, so it's your problem. All right, you will have to ask Mr. Lam Kwok Hong. Well, he has had many of his amendments cut out. So is there any good justifications from the administration? Because usually when members ask for deputations, in the past, very rarely would we decide against it. But then as on this occasion, children's health are at stake, and also elders' health are at stake, and also many users might not aware of what they are doing. So I'd like to know if they have any comments to give us, so that we are sure they have already done the consultation, and we are sure that given the pressure of time, there is no need for us to go for this meeting with deputation arrangement. In particular, for the 6 deputations and individuals who have come on the last occasion when we scrutinized the Pesticide Ordinance. So would they be interested in coming again? Well, last time when we had the Bills Committee, because on this occasion, theoretically, it's just an extension of what we did last time, because when we prepared the electrical brief, we already said that in the schedule, we only included 9 pesticides, which the CPG had already completed the legislative procedure for inclusion of those Stockholm regulated pesticides, and then after they've completed the rest, we would also do it. So on this occasion, you can say that it's a technical exercise. And then last time when we did the consultation, in fact, it's not just the 6 units. There was some 20 plus deputations who came to us, and then the secretary confirmed that. I remember on that occasion, for all the deputations that were here, whether they were from the trade or green groups or schools or parents, and who were concerned about the use of pesticides at schools and so on, all the deputations unanimously agreed that we should enact the legislation as soon as possible, so that the Stockholm can be extended to Hong Kong as quickly as possible. So that's an approach that they all agree with. But then on the code of practice, on the proper use of pesticides and so on, I think that discussion was not within the scope of the legislation. Most of that would be on the actual use and operation, as Mr. Chen said. So they are very concrete issues, or for example, how they are being used at schools or at aged homes and so on. So it's basically administrative work by the AFCD, and it has nothing to do with the legal framework, because the legal framework is already there. So in simple terms, my personal thinking about this is that, well, on this occasion, we are adding the 6 Stockholm Convention pesticides in the schedule. In fact, last year, it's just that it's just an extension of last year's exercise, because last time you already covered the 6 pesticides, as well as those that are already in the schedule. So everybody is aware of that. Yes, in the electrical brief, we have already included that. So the secretary has also given me a copy of the report last time, and we did have the record towards the end of the report saying that members were aware that 6 would be added at a later stage, and they had no objection about that. But then Mr. Cheung was asking, well, have you informed those deputations who came last time about this? So have you informed the individuals or the deputations? We have not separately written to them. So can you do that through our secretariat? If you had their contacts, then can you write to them telling them that the 6 would be added to the schedule? Mr. Albert Chen, according to experience, we understand that it's like when the administration deals with many policies and social issues, very often it's through the scrutiny of legislation, certain requests can be put to them. For example, last year when we scrutinized the amendment bill, we also had a seminar with the education institutions and so on. So many issues were raised in the process of the scrutiny of the legislation when we put the request to the administration, because otherwise if you just raise the request at panel meetings, it's not going to be useful at all. And therefore, let's not call it weapons, but then is something that we can have an influence on the administration when we scrutinize the legislation. If we just allow them to pass without any amendment, then we don't know when we'll be able to raise it again and when the administration will respond to that. So unless there are other special reasons, all right, on many previous occasions, we have extended the scrutiny period for subsidiary legislation, so it's just a very short period of time. But then we will have to finish with the appropriation bill before we can go for the resolution on the extension of scrutiny of this. I'm sure the President, who has a lot of political wisdom, will be able to deal with this, because it involves issues that might have to do with safety and health and human lives. That's why the implications might be very far-reaching. Ms. Emily Lau, I can see paragraph 5 of the Legal Services Unit report. According to what they said, the administration had not consulted the relevant panel, so it's a fact, I suppose. So it's just that on the last amendment exercise you mentioned this. I think it's only right that you should go and consult the public as to what is going to happen in the future. There is no way that either you or me can tell. So we just follow the procedures, and if we have already done it, and if we are not able to do it, then it's not our problem. All right, there are other procedures that are standing in the way, which render it impossible for us to pass the resolution. We should not pretend that we are prophets, thinking that something will happen. And if we fail to do our job, then we will not be able to account for ourselves to the public. And if you have every confidence in that, then what's wrong with putting that notice up on the web? Nobody would be responding to that. You cannot just cook up something. So I think we should follow the procedures. We should ask the secretary to invite deputations to come. We should not just say that we should not do it on this occasion and that. So we have this rule. We have the rule of law, and therefore we have to go by the procedures. So I think we should just follow the established practice. And then on the conventions and other things, according to the electoral brief provided by the administration, you said that our state in November 2004 and August 2008 have applied the 2 conventions to Hong Kong in those 2 years. So we are referring to 2004 and 2008. And yet we waited till 2013 before we came up with the amendment bill. And then you said that it came into effect on the 27th of January this year. But then if you look at the time when the CPG applied the 2 conventions to us, it's 12 years, or it's 10 years since the application, and 6 years since the application of the Rotterdam Convention to us. So why did you not do it faster? And then you might need to allow for a grandfathering arrangement, because people might have imported all the stocks and so on. As Mr. Cheung just suggested, we might have to spend some money to buy back those stocks. But then how come you have used so many years before you managed to do it? As we explained to the Bills Committee initially, why we had spent that much time on it. Back in 2004 or 2008, when the Stockholm Convention applied to Hong Kong upon the notification by the CPG to us, we already started to look into it. so that we had to introduce our own legislative regime to regulate that. In 2007, the Food and Health Bureau also conducted a public consultation exercise on the series of legislative amendments that would be required. So it's a very comprehensive consultation. So other than complying with the requirements of the two conventions, at the same time, we also looked at the regulatory regime on pesticides. We had some new suggestions. We also had to reform the registration system, and whether or not with regard to the users, we also need to impose some controls and so on. So in the consultation period, we received many comments, including comments from members at the panel. They were concerned that if we just roll out the regulatory controls in one go, that might affect the survival of the trade and also their operations. That's why, after a lot of back and forth discussions, there were some delays, and then afterwards, after considering the views from both sides, we took some administrative measures to step up control on the use and proper use of pesticides, including what some members suggested. We also introduced some code of practice to the trade and also enhanced education for the traders and so on. And after those, we could see that the exercise yielded some results, and we believe that we could act under the existing regulatory regime. And that's why in 2012 we consulted the relevant panel of this council again, and we said that with regard to the amendments, they would be focused on the implementation or application of the convention, and then for the rest, as I said, we would step up education and the standard of use in order to take care of the concerns of all sides.
At the time, we had the support of the panel, and that's why we introduced the bill. Madam Chair, we can see for ourselves that it has taken us from 2004 to 2008, and then 2012, 2013, 2014. Yes, we know that we have to strike a balance among the various interests, and we want to have a favorable business environment. But at the same time, you have to safeguard public health. If necessary, you have to and you can explain the matter to the trade. And if they suffer a loss, of course, you have to take care of them, instead of dragging your feet all the way from 2004. It has been mentioned that you can resort to non-legislative means to ban the use of hazardous pesticides. Would you like to elaborate on this? Well, maybe Mr. Lau can elaborate on the 6 pesticides under the Stockholm Convention. They have already been banned. They are not registered. Hong Kong doesn't manufacture the pesticides. Anybody trying to import the pesticides, they need to take out a permit. According to the FCD's records, we haven't had any importation of such pesticides for quite a period of time. Mr. Lau? Well, in fact, we have done our homework. The meetings take place once every 2 years. In preparation of a forthcoming meeting, we'll try to identify the pesticides, and then we'll tell the trade that probably the pesticides involved will be discussed at the international level. They may be regulated any time, so they should start depleting their stock. All the 6 pesticides, one of them has been registered, called Linden, but for the rest, they have never been registered. So for the past 3 years, we have never had any import, export, re-export of all the 6 pesticides. They have been banned. In other words, we don't wait for the inclusion of the pesticides by the CPG. And you have to understand that there are two ways to go about it. Within 12 months of endorsement internationally, each country has to inform the UN as to whether it is willing to join or not. If there's no notification, then it will be deemed as not willing to join. China, upon joining the convention, made it a point that unless with a written notification, the regulatory framework concerning particular pesticide would not be binding on China. So, if certain pesticides have not been included in the Chinese regulatory regime, we can't include them in our law. But irrespective of that, if we find that a pesticide is not suitable for Hong Kong, if it constitutes a harm to Hong Kong, the FCD can make use of his powers to revoke the registration of a particular pesticide. We've been following the international trends closely. Once a pesticide is included in the convention, will abolish the will cancel the registration. Well, I think it's better for you to have written them into the legislative paper. Well, you haven't got any legal backing. How come that they don't challenge your decision? What is the basis? Is it just because it's been banned by the convention? Well, basically, all the pesticides are regulated by CAP 133. Depending on the degree of toxicity, they will be placed in different schedules, subject to a different regulatory mechanism. Registered pesticides are included in the register, having a lower degree of toxicity. And then for pesticides outside the register, they are called unregistered pesticides. Some of them will be scheduled. In other words, catching all the pesticides listed clearly in the two conventions. So that will form part of the unregistered pesticides. So even for the method referred to by Mr. Lau, we do have a statutory backing. So it's very confusing. The director of AFCD can exercise his discretion and powers. Government Council, under CAP 133, Section 6, the director of the department can exercise his powers if public health deems it necessary. He can cancel the registration or suspend the registration of a particular pesticide. That's the legal backing. So whether we included them or not, it doesn't matter. You don't have to wait for the CPG's instruction. You can still ban the importation. Mr. Lau? All that have been included in the schedule belong to the group called unregistered pesticides. For unregistered pesticides, they are all regulated by CAP 133. Once they are included into the schedule, not even transshipment will be allowed. Generally speaking, transshipment will be allowed. But once it is included in convention, we can control the transshipment as well. So whether they are included in the schedule or not, it doesn't cause any difference concerning the general public. It's only a matter of transshipment that would be affected. So no one has ever applied for any transshipment. We don't have the capacity to manufacture the pesticides. We have to amend the law because we want to be in agreement with the convention. Should there be a pesticide in transit through Hong Kong, as a party to the convention, we are duty-bound to regulate the transshipment as well. It seems that it is watertight. Is it really that good? Members have always been very worried. I just hope that the FCD is telling us the truth. Madam Chair, if I may just cover a few points arising from members' question as to whether deputation should be invited. Of course, it is entirely within your jurisdiction to make a decision. In Mr. Albert Chen's statement, he did say that during the scrutiny of the bill, there was a lot of concern. I have already said that in July last year, upon completion of scrutiny by the Bills Committee, the administration came up with a list of pledges. Since July, we have had a detailed work plan being worked out. Of course, we can't finish all the tasks on the list, but we have been following up on the list of actions. Probably in the second half of the year, we'll go back to the Food Safety and Environmental Hygiene panel to give you an idea about the progress of our work. So perhaps members can consider this idea in the light of the tight timetable that we are caught in. Since we are going to issue a paper to for the panel, maybe you would find it suitable to invite deputations when the panel has a discussion of their progress report. And then you can get from the deputations as to their feedback on our work. The clerk has already told us about the time frame. Let's not have any conjecture about the progress of the Wednesday sitting. We have to extend the scrutiny period before 7th of May if we want to do so. Of course, it's up to the President to exercise his discretion to swap the order of the agenda items. But why don't we just adhere to the original timetable? Perhaps we can consider inviting the deputations which attended the Bills Committee meetings. We can invite individuals as well, so we can arrange for a public hearing. The administration told us that a lot of work has been covered since the bill's passage. So why don't you put together a paper telling us about the recommendations or follow-up work, etc. We're trying to see how much we can cover. Albert Chen, it's been mentioned that some pesticides and some chemicals have been banned as a result of the director's discretionary power. Towards the end of this year, 2 more will be banned. So can you not give us a list that can be covered in the progress report? Because paraquat and one other pesticide has been mentioned last time. So before end of 2014, those 2 will be deleted from the register. What about those already banned in the past? Can you not give us a list, an itemized list? Yes, please also give us that information in the progress report. You mean those already deregistered? Yes, that can be done. Members, do you have other questions? Can I clarify? Now, if we want to extend the scrutiny period, that will take us to 7th of May. No, we have to move a motion to extend the scrutiny period on the 7th, extended until 28th. If we can't have any extension, then what will happen? Then it will come into effect automatically. So first of all, we need to see if we can ask for extension. Maybe we can ask the President to exercise discretion to swap the agenda items. Yes, I agree with you. We are not blocking the way, because if we can't extend the scrutiny, then they will just go ahead with the commencement. Before we adjourn the meeting, we can take a look of the notice itself. We'll certainly have a second meeting. Since we still have got time, so perhaps we should look at the notice as well. The content is rather simple, so please go to the notice. Who will walk us through? Will it be the Government Council or Ms. Lam? First of all, date of commencement. As I have said, it will come into operation on the 1st of June 2014. Section 2, a brief description, and then Section 3, we have already got 9 items in the schedule. And then we just follow the sequence, and we are adding 6 pesticides to the schedule. For the serial numbers on the right-hand side, they are the serial numbers commonly adopted internationally. So for those who are in the trade, they can just look at the serial number and they can tell what we are talking about. What about the usage? For the paraquat, we know that it's being sprayed on the lawn. Well, for the 6, for linden, other than linden, for the other 5, nobody uses them in Hong Kong. Well, for the 15th item, technical endosulfan and its related isomers. I think it is quite a good one because it is very effective as underground pest control. So it used to be registered. It was quite popular. So it is effective in relation to underground pests, those eating the roots of the plants. But internationally, it is sort of marginally regarded as a persistent pollutant, persistent organic pollutant. So it attracted huge international controversy in relation to its inclusion. Some countries insisted that it should be allowed to be used, so there were certain concessions.
As far as Hong Kong is concerned, we don't have a situation whereby this has to be used and no alternatives can be used. That's why we have not applied any exemption on that. In other words, that substance has been removed from the list already, and we're not going to allow it to be registered again in the future. So in the past, it used to serve some purposes. It used to be an effective pesticide, but then in terms of its residue, when compared to other pesticides, the residual period would be shorter. Well, in fact, if it remains there longer, then there are some merits in the sense that you don't have to apply it time and again. But then, of course, if the residues are there for a long period of time, of course, there are also other problems. For the first 5, they have not been used in Hong Kong, but then and then for the 6, it's been banned already. So for the 6, they are no longer being used in Hong Kong. Is that right? So why do you have to include them in the list? So we'll be regulating the transshipment as well. All right. The Secretary will issue an invitation to the deputations and individuals who came to us last time to invite their comments, and then we'll have to fix another meeting as soon as possible to look at the progress report by the administration. And if there are deputations or individuals who would like to come again, then we can meet with them at the next meeting. So we'll schedule one more meeting. I don't know if it's necessary for us to have another meeting. All right, if there is no request from the individuals or deputations wanting to meet with us, and if we just look at the schedule, we don't have to have another meeting at all. So first of all, we'll have to ask the administration to come up with a paper first. Unless it's requested by the deputations, we don't have to have another meeting. So we'll fix the meeting first, and then if there is no need for us to go ahead with the meeting, then we can just cancel it. So it first will have to be dependent on when the administration can come up with a paper. So will it be ready next week? Yes, early next week. So circulate it to us, and then we'll decide. Thank you very much.